Zelensky is a failed leader of a failed state, and he's not getting the support that he asked for. He's getting the crumbs. He came up with a desperate plan, the Zelensky peace plan, which is little more than it's called Ukraine wins. And the victory of Ukraine is contingent upon the strategic defeat of Russia. And so he says, in order for Ukraine to win, to regain its territory, Russia must be defeated. In order to defeat Russia, Ukraine needs certain assistance from the West.
Ukraine's military situation continues to deteriorate amid growing challenges on multiple fronts. A big reason for this is that the Ukrainian government has struggled to secure the substantial Western support needed to sustain its war effort. Recent diplomatic efforts, including high-profile visits to the United States, have failed to yield the significant military and economic assistance Kyiv had hoped for. Instead, the aid being offered is increasingly limited, a sign of waning enthusiasm for the conflict among Ukraine's Western allies. In his recent interview, Scott Ritter analyzed the current situation in Ukraine and called Zelensky a failed leader of the failed state. One critical issue is that Ukraine's prospects for a decisive military victory depend heavily on a strategic weakening of Russian forces, something that has not materialized. Western governments, facing economic pressures at home, especially in Europe, are now grappling with the limits of their ability to support Ukraine. This is due to Europe's own economic challenges, including rising inflation and energy crises, which have eroded its capacity to offer the robust assistance necessary to match Ukraine's ambitious goals. In this situation, the U.S. remains a key player, but questions about the sustainability of its financial aid persist, especially with increasing demands on American resources in other global crises like hurricane-stricken areas. According to Ritter, the U.S. could find itself increasingly isolated due to global reactions to America's support for Israel and its failure to address issues responsibly. He highlighted that the United States cannot afford a war with Russia right now, as it can go nuclear quickly. Economically, Russia has shown surprising resilience, far exceeding Western expectations that the country would collapse under sanctions. The Russian economy has adapted, and it now benefits from strong ties with non-Western markets, particularly through its growing engagement with the BRICS bloc. This shift in economic alliances has helped Russia offset the impact of Western sanctions, weakening the economic leverage that the US and Europe initially hoped to wield. So, as the BRICS coalition strengthens, Russia's strategic positioning on the global stage has only solidified. Adding to this, Ritter has criticized the perception in the West that Russia is merely bluffing, arguing that such assumptions could lead to catastrophic consequences if Russia were to act decisively. Ritter posed a rhetorical question about the wisdom of risking a confrontation with a nuclear power, comparing it to playing Russian roulette. He questioned whether the stakes are worth the gamble, saying that the consequences of misjudging Russia's resolve could be devastating. Meanwhile, the military dynamics on the ground remain grim for Ukraine. Russia's forces have maintained steady advances, capitalizing on their superior logistical capabilities and extensive combat experience. In contrast, Ukrainian troops, despite receiving NATO training, lack the long-term battlefield experience required to effectively counter Russia's seasoned forces. This disparity in combat readiness has become a defining characteristic of the conflict. One key challenge Ukraine faces is sustaining its military in the field. Maintaining supply lines, securing ammunition, and ensuring reliable field maintenance has proven difficult, especially as Russia has demonstrated its ability to adapt to prolonged warfare. Moreover, Russian forces have built robust supply chains that can withstand the rigors of sustained conflict, giving them a strategic advantage over Ukraine's more fragile infrastructure. However, the implications of these developments extend beyond the battlefield. The geopolitical balance is shifting, with Europe increasingly strained by internal economic issues. Germany, a cornerstone of the European Union, is facing economic stagnation, with forecasts predicting zero growth in the near future. This economic downturn could have significant consequences for the EU's ability to maintain a unified front in support of Ukraine. Additionally, the European Union and NATO have shown vulnerabilities in their long-term strategic planning. The reliance on sanctions as a tool to weaken Russia has largely backfired, harming European economies while leaving Russia relatively unscathed. As European nations reassess their priorities, There is a growing sense that continued support for Ukraine may not align with their national interests. Ritter stated that there is a growing recognition in the U.S. that Ukraine is likely to lose the war against Russia and that efforts to support Ukraine have become increasingly futile. He described the situation as akin to throwing life preservers to a sinking ship, acknowledging that Ukraine's prospects for survival, especially through the winter, are grim. He suggested that any resolution would ultimately require Ukraine to unconditionally surrender to Russia. On top of this, Ukraine's internal political stability is also under strain. Reports of corruption and infighting within the government have raised concerns about the ability of Kyiv's leadership to manage the war effort effectively. Therefore, as Western financial aid continues to flow, questions remain about whether these resources are being used effectively or are being siphoned off by corrupt officials. This instability further complicates Ukraine's already precarious position. According to Ritter, Scott Ritter expressed skepticism about U.S. control over Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, suggesting he operates without a constitutional basis and that confidence in his leadership is dwindling. Ritter noted that many Ukrainian ministers are fleeing due to rampant corruption, which has led them to hoard Western financial aid instead of committing to the fight for Ukraine. He compared Zelensky's situation to past leaders who abandoned their posts during crises, predicting that Zelensky and his associates would escape with their fortunes as Ukraine faces military defeat. Ritter stated that, "That's eventually what's going to happen here, is that Zelensky cronies are going to run with their money. They have already put billions and billions around the world, hidden in real estate, hidden in banks, hidden in other investments." Moving back to Germany, Scott Ritter also discussed German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's political struggles and the implications for the European Union. He criticized Scholz for previously betting on sanctions to weaken Russia, which backfired and left Germany facing economic stagnation. Now, as his party faces electoral challenges, he may seek to improve relations with Russia to revive Germany's economy. In addition, Scholz recognizes that Ukraine is a lost cause and is looking for a way to negotiate a settlement, possibly involving Ukraine conceding territory in exchange for energy support from Russia. However, Russia would never agree to Ukraine joining NATO, and the best outcome for Ukraine might be a neutral status. Therefore, Ritter concluded that Russia's territorial claims are justifiable, given Ukraine's historical use as a launch point for attacks against Russia. Now, regarding the future of Ukraine and its relationship with Russia and Europe, a final peace deal can be suggested. For this, the territories currently claimed by Russia may need to be recognized, and Germany could play a role in negotiating such an arrangement. This is because Russia no longer sees Europe as a reliable partner and views Ukraine as a defeated nation with no meaningful future. According to Ritter, that's Zelensky's fantasy that the world revolves around Ukraine, that Ukraine will have a seat at the table, that because Ukraine was the shield that protected Europe from Russia, Ukraine is defeated, a defeated nation. Looking ahead, the likelihood of a Ukrainian military victory seems increasingly remote as Scott Ritter continued to express a clear stance on the ongoing conflict involving Ukraine, Russia, and the West. As of now, Russia is not interested in preserving Ukraine as a viable state, as there are two primary pillars of Russian policy: demilitarization and densification. Therefore, as long as the West supports a Ukrainian government that does not align with Russia's goals, there will be no resolution. Ritter has strongly highlighted that Ukraine has been nothing but a cancer to Europe and Russia ever since the end of the Second World War. Moreover, he critiques the leadership in Europe, particularly focusing on countries like France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, suggesting that their current governments are not capable of negotiating a meaningful peace. Russia has been betrayed by Europe many times and has little interest in repairing relations, instead opting to let Western nations deal with the consequences of their actions. Adding to this, Russia is growing ties with BRICS nations to sustain its economy without Western support, so it does not need Europe anymore. Therefore, Ritter expresses skepticism about the future of negotiations with Western leaders, suggesting that Russia is in a position of strength and will not rush into discussions until a more favorable political landscape emerges. He implies that the West needs to reassess its approach and acknowledge Russia's significant losses in the conflict. However, keep in mind that Russia does not blame Ukraine for these losses, viewing the conflict as a war against NATO and the collective West. In Ritter's view, any future discussions with Russia will be shaped by the new political realities in Europe and will likely be both fair and harsh in terms of the conditions set forth. Therefore, it is the West that needs to seek reconciliation with Russia, not the other way around. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more reports.